Hey guys, tonight you find yourself waking beneath a heavy wool blanket in a private chamber high inside a medieval manor. Long before the winter sun has made any serious attempt to rise, the stone wall beside your bed feels cold enough to preserve cheese. Dampness gathers faintly around the narrow window. Smoke from last night's fire still clings to the soot-dark rafters, and somewhere beyond the shutters, a horse breathes clouds into the freezing yard. Farther away, a monastery bell moves through the river mist, slow and hollow, marking an hour you cannot check because no cheerful little clock sits beside your bed. Your boots from yesterday remain near the hearth, still carrying dried mud from the outer ward. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. And although your chamber's more comfortable than anything most people beyond these walls will ever know, you probably would not last a week out here without servants, firewood, thick wool, and a very forgiving attitude toward cold water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what the local time is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You remain still beneath the blankets for another moment, listening to the manor wake around you. There is no sharp division between night and morning here. Dawn arrives by degrees. First comes the bell, then the faint scrape of feet in the passage, then the soft complaint of an oak door swelling in winter damp. Somewhere below, a kitchen servant has begun stirring ashes from the great cooking hearth, searching for living embers beneath the grey crust so that the household fires do not have to be struck entirely anew. Your own hearth is nearly dead. A single red glow survives beneath a collapsed piece of charcoal. Beside it stands a low iron fire tongue, a wooden stool, and a small basket containing carefully rationed billets of wood. Even in a prosperous household, fuel is not something to squander. Forest rights matter, fallen branches matter, who may gather dead wood, who may cut timber, and who may take brush from a lord's woodland can produce arguments long enough to outlive the people who started them. You pull the blanket higher. The bed itself is one of the clearest signs that you're not an ordinary villager. Its wooden frame stands raised from the floor, with curtains hanging around it to trap warmth and offer privacy. Beneath you lies a mattress stuffed with wool and feathers rather than a simple sack of straw. The linen sheet has been washed recently, though recently is a generous medieval word. The floor beyond the bed is covered with rushes. Fresh rushes give off a faint grassy smell when crushed beneath shoes, and herbs may be scattered among them: lavender, sweet woodruff, mint, perhaps meadow sweet, partly for fragrance and partly because everyone appreciates anything capable of winning a temporary battle against the combined odours of people, dogs, damp wool, smoke, grease, and medieval architecture. Some swear that certain herbs laid beneath a noblewoman's bed can also discourage nightmares. Others insist rosemary near the pillow strengthens memory, while mugwort may protect a sleeper from troublesome dreams. No one can quite agree whether such things actually work, but disagreement has never prevented anyone from placing another bunch of herbs near the bed just in case. A faint scratch comes from the bottom of the door. Your little dog is awake. It is a small, long-haired creature that considers itself both guardian of the chamber and owner of everything inside it. During the night it has apparently decided that the best place to sleep is against the door, where it can complain whenever anyone attempts to enter. The scratching stops. A moment later comes a quiet knock. One of your chamber attendants enters carrying a covered clay lamp and a fresh beeswax candle. She moves carefully, because a noblewoman's morning may involve many ceremonies, but tripping over a dog before sunrise is not one of the approved ones. The candle is valuable. Ordinary households often rely on rushlights or tallow candles, which smoke and smell more strongly. Beeswax burns more cleanly and brightly, making it suitable for churches and wealthy rooms. Even so, nobody leaves one burning casually. Wax represents labour hives kept, combs gathered, honey separated, wax rendered, candles shaped. The attendant touches flame to the wick. Warm gold slowly expands across the room. The painted chest at the wall emerges from darkness. So does the iron-bound coffer where clothing and valuables are kept. A small devotional image appears above a stool, its painted saint looking remarkably alert for this hour. You push yourself upright. The cold immediately finds every exposed inch of skin. Another bell sounds in the distance. This one seems nearer, perhaps from the manor chapel rather than the monastery beyond the fields. Bells divide the day into recognizable pieces: prayer, work, meals, warning, celebration. They speak across walls, forests, fog, and farmland. For you, they are more reliable than the pale winter sky. Your attendant crosses to the hearth and kneels with the iron tongs. She coaxes the remaining ember beneath dry kindling, bends close, and blows. A weak flame appears, then another. Soon the first thin threads of fresh smoke curl upward. The dog abandons the doorway at once and approaches the hearth with the solemn expression of an animal that believes the entire operation has been performed specifically for its comfort. You lower your bare feet toward the floor, but hesitate. Stone lies beneath the rushes. Cold stone. Very cold stone. There are many privileges attached to noble birth, but apparently immunity from freezing toes is not among them. You place your feet carefully into fur-lined slippers. From somewhere below comes the heavy sound of a bar being lifted from an inner door. Servants are opening passages, carrying water, sweeping yesterday's dirt, fetching wood, checking lamps. In the stable yard, a groom calls softly to a horse. Beyond the walls, villagers are already moving through frost toward barns and sheds. Your day has not properly begun, yet dozens of other people are awake because this household must be awake before you are. That is one of the quieter truths of noble life. Privacy exists, but it is never complete. Even here, behind oak doors and bed curtains, your morning depends upon unseen hands. The fire strengthens. The beeswax candle burns steadily. And as you sit on the edge of the bed, listening to the next distant bell travel over frozen fields, the manor continues unfolding from darkness around you. The warmth from the revived hearth is modest at best, more promise than achievement, but in a winter chamber even promise has value. You sit while the beeswax candle throws its steady light across the coffer and painted chest, and the attendant returns with a basin of water that steams only faintly. Medieval comfort, like medieval optimism, tends to arrive in limited portions. The basin is set upon a stool, along with a linen cloth and a smaller bowl containing a little scented water. Rose if the season and purse allow it. Lavender if the household garden has been kind. Rosemary if someone in the stillroom has been feeling ambitious. Cleanliness in your world is not the same thing as daily immersion in a hot bath. That would be delightfully impractical and ruinously time-consuming. Instead, the day begins with washing the face and hands, the neck, perhaps the chest. A brisk attention to the visible and important places, all performed with the seriousness of ritual and the speed demanded by cold air. You dip your fingers into the basin and immediately regret every life choice that has brought you to this exact moment. The attendant is diplomatic enough not to smile. Another woman enters carrying freshly warmed linen from near the kitchen fire below, folded carefully over her arm. A third follows with combs, ribbons, a girdle, and the day's garments. Noble life may suggest leisure from a distance, but from up close it involves an astonishing quantity of fabric. Your night rail is loosened, and the chamber briefly becomes a small storm of cloth, hands, and whispered reminders. The women move around you with practiced ease. First comes the long linen chemise, soft against the skin, finer than what most women in the village could hope to own. Linen rests closest to the body because it can be washed more often than wool, and because no one wishes to spend all day wrapped immediately in the scratchier truth of outer garments. Over this comes the kirtle, laced and fitted, its wool dyed a muted but handsome shade, something between teal and grey in the candlelight. Dyes announce rank, resources, and taste. Deep colours require money, skill, and materials that do not fall from the sky. Brilliant scarlet, rich blue, and proper black are all more troublesome than they first appear. Clothing is never merely clothing here. It is account book, reputation, and conversation starter, all stitched together with a great many tiny holes and cords. Some swear that certain colours encourage certain tempers. Green may invite lightness, blue constancy, red pride, and yellow, depending on who is speaking, either joy or poor judgment. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these claims come from inherited wisdom or from people who simply like turning dye into philosophy. Your attendants have opinions regardless. One murmurs that blue suits you best because it flatters a composed nature. Another replies that blue is also associated with the Virgin, and therefore encourages proper modesty, which is a very efficient way of complimenting you while also reminding you how you're expected to behave. A third says nothing, but raises an eyebrow in the direction of a saffron-trimmed sleeve, as if to suggest that a woman wearing too much brightness in winter is only one step away from moral collapse. The dog, now fully warmed by the hearth, wanders over and sits directly in the path of the hem. It contributes nothing to the proceedings except fur and judgment. Your hair comes next, because an adult noblewoman does not usually drift through the day with loose hair flying around her face like a woodland prophet. The attendants bring combs of wood and horn, and they begin the patient work of drawing the tangles free. Hair in your world is not only beauty but discipline. It must be ordered, smoothed, braided, pinned, veiled. Unbound hair carries meanings: girlhood, intimacy, disorder, mourning, sometimes temptation, depending on the room and the witness. A little oil is worked into the ends. The comb passes again and again. You watch the candlelight catch the polished teeth of the comb, hear the faint crackle from the fire, and listen as one attendant mentions a country belief from her mother's village that hair clippings should never be left where birds can steal them for their nests, or else the owner will suffer headaches and restless sleep. Another says that nail parings and lost threads should also be burned or buried, lest a malicious person use them in a charm. No one can quite agree whether such fears belong more to superstition or caution, but the older women in great households tend to throw nothing personal carelessly away. It is remarkable how often practical tidiness and possible magic end up sharing the same basket. At last your hair is braided and coiled, then covered with a fine linen veil, pinned into place with more ingenuity than comfort. Over that comes a wimple or head covering appropriate to the morning indoors, framing the face and keeping every strand where custom believes it ought to be. The effect is graceful, dignified, and just a little bit like being wrapped for storage. Jewellery is added sparingly. A ring, perhaps, a brooch fastened at the shoulder, a simple chain, not the full display reserved for feast days or formal visits, but enough to remind the world that you belong to a house of standing. Metal clasps catch the candlelight, the girdle settles at your waist, and from it may hang a small purse, a knife, keys on certain days, or devotional tokens. A girdle is useful and symbolic at once. Some women have blessed girdles associated with saints, believed to protect childbirth or guard the wearer from illness. Others keep tiny sewn charms hidden in lining or sleeve hem and herb, a scrap of prayer, a token no larger than a fingernail. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the protection comes from holiness, habit, or simple hope. At last the fur-lined overgown is brought near so the chill of the chamber cannot undo all previous efforts. Its lining brushes your wrists with a luxury almost equal to forgiveness. One attendant kneels to smooth the hem, another straightens the veil, a third steps back to inspect the whole arrangement with the grave expression of a master mason studying a cathedral wall. You rise. The clothes settle around you with their familiar weight, linen beneath, wool around, fur at the edges, girdle drawn, veil pinned, brooch secure. You're warm now, or at least warmer, which in this century counts as triumph. The half-burned candle still glows near the bedside. The dog circles twice and curls again by the hearth, apparently satisfied that you have been assembled correctly. Beyond the chamber door the castle passage waits in shadow, and from somewhere beyond stone walls another bell rolls through the morning air. You are dressed at last, made ready by candlelight for the day that has only just begun. The chamber door opens onto a passage that seems darker than the room you are leaving. The candle carried ahead of you throws a narrow pool of gold across the stone floor, catching on iron hinges, the edge of a wall hanging, and the polished nose of the little dog that has decided without consultation to accompany you. Your slippers make almost no sound over the rushes. The air outside the chamber is colder. It slips beneath your sleeves and finds the small gaps where wool, linen, and fur fail to agree on their responsibilities. You draw the edge of your outer garment closer as you move through the private passage toward the household chapel. Morning prayer comes before the household settles fully into eating, accounts, petitions, and the 100 practical inconveniences of being important. A servant walks ahead carrying the candle. Behind you, one of your women follows quietly. You pass a narrow window where the winter sky has begun to pale from black to a smoky blue-grey. Below, the inner yard is still mostly shadow. A groom crosses it carrying a wooden bucket. Someone opens the stable door, and a horse stamps against frozen ground. Breath rises from man and animal alike. Beyond the walls, the monastery bell sounds again. The bell does not merely tell you that morning has arrived, it gives shape to the day itself. In a world without clocks in every chamber, bells perform the work of invisible hands, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers. Compline the names drift through monasteries and religious houses, marking prayer through darkness and light. A noble household does not always follow monastic hours with perfect strictness, but the rhythm seeps outward into ordinary life. You know the sound of the nearby abbey. You know which bell carries farthest over the river when fog lies low. You know when the wind changes because sometimes the bells seem close enough to touch, while on other mornings they vanish entirely behind weather. Some swear that bells can do more than measure time. They say consecrated bells may frighten away demons, storms, and troublesome spirits. In certain places, bells are rung when dangerous weather approaches, as though thunder itself might respect ecclesiastical authority. No one can quite agree whether storms are truly impressed. Still, when black clouds gather over the fields, nobody complains when the bells begin. The passage turns. A small carved figure of a saint stands in a niche beside the chapel entrance. Someone has tucked a sprig of dried greenery beneath it, perhaps left from a feast day or placed there by a servant with private reasons. You slow as you approach. The household chapel is not large. It does not need to be. It is a private sacred space within the manor, built for the Lord's family, guests, and selected members of the household rather than for an entire village. The oak door opens. Warmth does not greet you. Apparently holiness has not solved the problem of winter masonry. The chapel smells of cold stone, wax, old incense, and wool dampened by mist. A few candles burn before painted images. Their flames reflect softly from gilded details on the altar. The priest is already present. So is a clerk or chaplain, head bowed over a book. The pages are parchment, thick and pale, made from carefully prepared animal skin. The writing is dark, measured, and laborious. A decorated initial catches the candlelight in red and blue. Books are costly objects here, more treasure than convenience, and even a small religious volume represents weeks or months of trained work. You take your place. The dog is stopped at the doorway. It looks personally betrayed. A servant gently closes the door upon its expression of wounded innocence. Prayer begins. Latin words move through the chapel in a low current. You understand some easily, some through repetition, and some perhaps only in fragments. That does not necessarily reduce their power. Familiar sounds can become a kind of architecture. They surround you before you fully consider their meaning. You kneel. Cold travels upward through the cushion. Your hands fold. For a while the practical world outside becomes distant. There are no inventories here, no grain accounts, no broken fences, no servants asking whether 2 barrels of salted herring should last until Lent. Only candlelight, murmured prayer, and the soft shifting of fabric. Near the altar stands a small reliquary. It is shaped like a tiny gilded box and contains, according to household tradition, a fragment connected with a saint whose name has been invoked by generations of the family. Exactly what the fragment is depends on who is telling the story. A piece of bone, perhaps. A scrap of cloth. A splinter associated with some holy place. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the relic arrived through a pilgrim, a travelling cleric, or an ancestor who returned from overseas with a suspiciously impressive collection of sacred objects. The family treats it with respect anyway. Relics matter because holiness is believed to leave traces. A saint's body, clothing, or possessions may carry sacred power through physical contact. Churches compete for them. Pilgrims travel long distances to see them. Towns become wealthy because people come seeking healing, forgiveness, protection, or simply the assurance that the divine world has touched something tangible. Your household relic is modest, and perhaps questionable. The chaplain once remarked, very carefully, that there seemed to be rather many alleged fragments of certain famous saints scattered across Christendom. He has not repeated that observation in front of your older aunt. Your aunt considers skepticism a spiritual defect best corrected by louder prayer. The service continues. Incense rises in a thin grey thread. The smoke curls into the dim upper space of the chapel, joining the old scent absorbed into wood and stone. You glance toward the narrow window. Daylight is strengthening. The bells have carried you across another invisible boundary. Night is retreating beyond the walls. In the yard, more servants will already be moving. Kitchen fires will be brightening, bread will be cut, ale poured, orders whispered. But for another few minutes, you remain here. You touch the small devotional token at your girdle. Perhaps it bears the image of a saint. Perhaps it came from a pilgrimage made by someone in the family years ago. Pilgrim badges of tin or lead are common keepsakes, worn on hats, cloaks, or bags after journeys to shrines. Some travellers sew them onto garments proudly, proof that they have walked muddy roads, slept badly, eaten questionable food, and emerged spiritually improved, which is, in fairness, a very medieval definition of a holiday. The final prayers soften. The priest closes the book. You rise carefully, feeling stiffness from the cold despite the short time spent kneeling. When the chapel door opens, the little dog is still outside. It has not forgiven anyone. You step back into the passage as another bell fades over the winter fields, leaving only the quiet echo of prayer behind you and the growing smell of breakfast somewhere deeper within the waking household. The smell of breakfast grows stronger as you leave the chapel passage behind, following a warmer current of air toward the private solar where the household has prepared a small morning meal. The contrast is immediate. Here, the fire is already awake, licking around split logs in a stone hearth, and the room carries the mingled scents of wood smoke, toasted bread, wool, wax, and something faintly fishy that has almost certainly been declared nourishing by someone with authority. The dog trots ahead of you as if personally responsible for finding the food. Your morning meal is not a grand banquet. The main dinner of the day comes later, and breakfast among noble households can be simple, sometimes even skipped depending on season, habit, religious observance, or the opinions of whoever currently believes that eating too early encourages moral weakness. Fortunately, no such enthusiast appears to be present this morning. A servant places a wooden trencher before you. On it rests a thick piece of coarse bread, dark at the crust and still slightly warm. Beside it is a small portion of cheese, a few flakes of smoked fish, and a bowl of pottage that has been reheated from the previous day and improved with herbs. Improved is a generous term. Pottage is less a single dish than a way of life. Grain, peas, onions, leeks, herbs, scraps of meat when available, perhaps cabbage or root vegetables, all simmered together until they surrender any hope of separate identities. Today's version is thick and pleasantly salty. You lift a spoon and let the warmth settle into you. A cup of small ale waits beside the trencher. Water is certainly drunk in your world, contrary to tales that everyone avoids it entirely. But the quality depends greatly on the source. Wells, springs, streams, cisterns, and rainwater all carry different reputations. In a busy household, ale is familiar, nourishing, and often safer when made carefully. This batch is weak enough for morning. The dog sits beside your chair. Its gaze moves from your face to the smoked fish, then back again. It is an ancient negotiating technique. You ignore it. Outside the narrow window, the winter dawn finally begins to reveal the courtyard. Frost pales the edges of roof tiles. A servant carrying 2 buckets crosses from the well, shoulders bent under the wooden yoke. Near the stable, a boy brushes straw from a horse's flank while another groom checks leather straps hardened by cold. The household seems to be moving in circles around you, each person already deep inside a task. And then the news begins arriving. Not official news at first. Household news. The sort that travels faster than written messages and usually with better detail. One of your attendants mentions that the kitchen has received fewer eggs than expected from the lower farm. A servant says the baker complains that yesterday's flour was damp. Someone else reports that a cart from the western village came in after dark with one wheel badly cracked. That catches your attention. The same cart, perhaps, that has caused trouble before. No one can quite agree whether the wheel failed because the road near the mill is deeply rutted, because the axle was poorly repaired, or because one of the carters insisted on loading 2 additional sacks of barley after being told very clearly not to. There is also, inevitably, a fourth explanation. Some swear that a broken wheel on the same stretch of road 3 times in one winter is a sign that the place is unlucky. The road passes an old hawthorn tree. That alone is enough to encourage stories. Hawthorn is treated with respect in many places, marks boundaries, grows beside old tracks, and may become entangled with beliefs about spirits, holy wells, and places best not disturbed. Cutting a lone hawthorn carelessly can be considered dangerous or simply foolish. Whether the tree has opinions about overloaded carts is another question. The steward's assistant appears at the doorway, waiting until you acknowledge him. He brings more practical matters. A messenger arrived shortly before dawn from one of the outlying farms. 2 sheep have been lost to illness. A tenant requests permission to take fallen timber from the woodland after recent wind. The miller wants confirmation of the date when grain dues will be counted. And, from the kitchen, there is concern about the remaining smoked fish. You look down at the smoked fish in front of you. It has suddenly become political. Winter stores demand constant attention. Grain, salted meat, smoked fish, dried beans, onions, apples, ale, cheese, honey, wax, firewood. Each must last through months when fields produce little and roads may become difficult. A noble household can possess abundance and still worry about running short. Status does not prevent arithmetic. You tear another piece from the bread. The crust resists with impressive determination. Medieval bread has not been designed for people who enjoy delicate chewing. The dog continues watching. At last, a tiny flake of fish falls near your foot. It disappears before touching the rushes. You pretend not to notice. A servant refreshes the fire. Sparks rise briefly into the chimney. The warmth makes your fur-lined sleeves feel almost excessive now. Though you know the moment you step back into a stone passage you will regret thinking this. Another report comes from the gate. 2 villagers wait outside asking to speak with the steward about grazing rights. A travelling peddler has also arrived carrying combs, pins, thread, cheap devotional badges, and what he claims is an ointment guaranteed to cure aching joints. The servant reporting this looks doubtful. You cannot blame him. Travelling remedies have a remarkable habit of curing everything except skepticism. Some mixtures are useful, of course. Honey, herbs, warmed oils, and simple salves can soothe real discomfort. Others depend more heavily upon confidence, prayer, mystery, and the seller leaving town before anyone asks for a refund. Even now, it is hard to tell whether certain remedies endure because they work, because people want them to work, or because hope itself is valuable when winter feels long. You finish the pottage slowly. The room remains quiet enough that you can hear servants crossing the corridor beyond the door. Somewhere farther below, a chopping block sounds beneath a kitchen knife. A maid laughs once, softly, before quickly lowering her voice. The sun is fully above the horizon now, though hidden behind a pale layer of cloud. Your breakfast is cleared. The trencher will not necessarily be wasted. Depending on custom and household practice, bread used as a trencher may be eaten afterward, given to servants, or distributed as alms. Nothing useful is casually discarded. You wipe your fingers with the linen cloth provided. The small ale has left warmth in your stomach. The chapel cold is finally gone from your hands. Then the steward's assistant returns, this time carrying a ring of iron keys. They give a soft, unmistakable clatter as he sets them upon the table. The sound changes the atmosphere at once. Breakfast is over. The household is waiting. The ring of iron keys lies on the table between you and the steward's assistant, heavy enough to make its own argument about responsibility. There are perhaps a dozen keys upon it, though only a few concern you directly this morning. Each differs slightly in length and shape, some darkened by years of use, others polished where fingers have rubbed the metal smooth. One opens the linen chest, another belongs to the spice cupboard, a third fits the storehouse where wax, dried fruit, and certain more valuable household goods are kept under closer watch. A fourth is so old that nobody seems entirely certain what it opens. Naturally, this makes it the most interesting one. The steward's assistant claims it once belonged to an outer storeroom near the old kitchen. Your senior attendant insists it opened a chest belonging to your husband's grandmother. The cook says it is probably useless and should be thrown away. No one can quite agree whether the key still has a lock somewhere within the manor, and this uncertainty has apparently protected it from disposal for at least 20 years. You lift the ring. The iron is cold against your fingers. Keys carry meaning beyond simple usefulness. A noblewoman entrusted with household keys is not merely opening cupboards. She's expected to guard resources, supervise stores, know what enters and leaves the household, and ensure that servants cannot quietly transform the winter supply of expensive spices into private prosperity. You rise from the breakfast table and follow the steward's assistant toward the service passage. The dog follows too. Of course it does. The first stop is the linen chamber. The door is thick oak reinforced with iron straps. You choose the proper key, turn it in the lock, and feel the mechanism resist before giving way with a deep metallic click. Inside, the air is dry and faintly scented with lavender. Shelves hold folded sheets, tablecloths, towels, napkins, and lengths of unused linen. Several painted chests stand beneath the shelves. A woman responsible for household linen steps forward with an account tally, and together you begin the slow work of checking what has been washed, what has worn thin, and what must be repaired before it tears beyond usefulness. Linen is wealth. It takes labour to grow flax, prepare the fibres, spin thread, weave cloth, bleach it, cut it, sew it, wash it, dry it, and mend it again. Nothing here is casually discarded because of one frayed edge. A sheet with a tear may become a smaller sheet. A smaller sheet may become cloths. Old cloths may end their lives in the kitchen, sick room, or cleaning basket. Even noble households understand the usefulness of making an object fail gradually. You run your fingers over a folded length of finer linen reserved for guests. It is smooth and pale. The household woman mentions that 3 napkins have gone missing since the last feast. She says this carefully. Missing cloth is always an awkward subject, because cloth does not usually grow legs and walk out of a chest. You ask whether they were counted after washing. They were. Whether they might have been moved to the chapel. Apparently not. The dog sniffs beneath the bench as if volunteering to investigate the crime. You suspect it is searching for crumbs. From the linen room you proceed to the candle store. Here the scent changes immediately. Beeswax has a warm sweetness even when unlit, while bundles of tallow candles smell heavier and more animal. The finest wax candles are kept for your chamber, chapel, important guests, and formal occasions. lesser rooms make do with cheaper light. The steward's assistant reads from the tally. 6 dozen beeswax candles remain. More tallow. Several bundles of rushlights. You calculate how quickly they are being used. Winter devours candles. Days are short, passages dark, and every additional hour of light costs something. A household that seems wealthy in summer can watch its wax disappear rapidly through December and January. Some people save candle stubs for remelting. Others place the final pieces near shrines or household images, believing that light already burned in prayer carries a kind of blessing with it. Some swear that a candle flame suddenly turning blue or guttering without wind warns of an unseen presence. You have seen plenty of candles gutter. Usually there is a draught. This explanation is far less satisfying to storytellers. Next comes the spice cupboard. This lock is better. The key turns cleanly. Inside stand small jars and boxes containing pepper, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, saffron, perhaps nutmeg if the household has recently purchased it. There is salt as well, though ordinary salt is stored in greater quantity elsewhere. The smell is richer than the room itself deserves. Pepper reaches you from far beyond your own world, crossing immense distances through merchants and middlemen before appearing in this cold stone manor. Saffron is so valuable that even a small amount is watched carefully. The cook has requested more pepper. The steward's assistant thinks the cook always requests more pepper. You suspect both statements are true. You inspect the jar. It is not empty. The cook will survive. Probably. From there you move into one of the larger winter storehouses where the responsibilities become heavier and less decorative. Sacks of grain are stacked upon raised boards to protect them from damp. Barrels of salted meat sit against one wall. Strings of onions hang from beams. Dried peas and beans rest in bins. Apples are arranged carefully so that one rotten fruit does not spoil its neighbours. Smoked fish hangs in rows, darker than the pale walls. You remember breakfast. The smoked fish question has followed you here. A household officer explains that the supply is lower than expected because more was distributed during recent fast days. The church calendar shapes eating as thoroughly as the seasons do. On designated days, meat may be restricted, making fish far more important. A poorly planned winter store can therefore become not only inconvenient but religiously awkward. You ask how much remains. He answers. You ask what is expected from the next delivery. He answers again, less confidently. The road from the fishing settlement has become difficult after rain and frost. There is that road again. Mud, ice, broken wheels, and now fish. The medieval economy appears determined to explain itself through transportation problems. You make a quiet decision, reduce unnecessary use until the next delivery arrives, but do not cut portions for servants who depend upon the household meals. The kitchen can stretch the supply with peas, eggs when available, and preserved cheese. The steward's assistant nods and makes a note on a small wax tablet. That gesture, simple as it seems, reveals what your morning really is. You're not merely wandering through storerooms choosing pleasing fabrics. You are managing consumption. You are balancing prestige against practicality. A noble household must feed servants, entertain guests, support dependents, maintain worship, survive winter, provide alms, and present an appearance of abundance without actually consuming everything before spring. Your authority operates through small decisions. How many candles may be issued? Which cloth is repaired? Whether pepper is bought? Who receives firewood? When grain is opened? Which chest remains locked? The last room you visit holds household silver, better tableware, and several objects used only on important occasions. The iron-bound chest requires 2 keys, one held by the steward and one entrusted within the family. You turn yours. He turns his. The lid rises. Metal glimmers faintly in the winter light. Among the cups, spoons, and serving pieces lies a small silver salt vessel, polished enough to catch your reflection in distorted form. Salt can mark status at table, just as seating does. Who sits nearer the finest vessel, who receives better bread, who drinks from silver rather than wood, all become part of the invisible grammar of rank. You close the chest again. The locks click. When you step back into the passage, the ring of keys hangs from your hand with a different weight than before. Beyond the walls, the day is fully awake. Inside them, so is your authority. The keys remain at your girdle as you leave the storehouse passage, knocking softly against one another with each step. Their weight is not uncomfortable, but it is difficult to forget. Every faint clink seems to remind you that somewhere nearby there is always another locked door, another barrel to count, another servant waiting for an answer. The dog walks at your heel. For once it appears almost dignified. You pass through a covered gallery toward a smaller chamber near the inner court where household business can be heard without turning the great hall into a marketplace of complaints. The morning has brightened, though the sky remains pale and low. Through an opening in the wall, you can see the gatehouse roof dark with moisture, and the yard below churned into a mixture of frost and mud. 2 men are already waiting. One is a tenant from the lower village, his wool cloak damp at the shoulders and his boots carrying enough mud to establish a small estate of their own. The other is a servant from one of the manor farms, red-handed from cold, with a folded cap held nervously against his chest. They bow. You take your place near the hearth. The fire here is smaller than the one in the solar, but it is enough to soften the chill. A clerk sits at a side table with a wax tablet and stylus, ready to note whatever must later be entered properly into household records. The first concern is fencing. A stretch of boundary fence near the eastern pasture has collapsed after recent wind. Several sheep crossed into a neighbouring strip of land. No great disaster followed, but the neighbouring tenant now insists that his winter rye has been damaged. The tenant before you insists that the sheep barely touched it. This is how many grand questions of medieval administration begins. Not with crowns. With sheep. You listen while he explains that the fence was already weak, that timber repairs were delayed, and that nobody could reasonably expect him to guard livestock through the night merely because the wind had ambitions. The steward's assistant stands nearby, expression carefully empty. You ask how much rye was damaged. Not much, apparently. You ask whether the fence can be repaired before the next storm. It can, if permission is given to take several lengths of timber from the estate woodland. There is the real question. Woodland is regulated carefully. Fallen branches may be gathered under certain customs, but cutting sound timber can require permission. Forests provide fuel, building material, pasture, hunting, nuts, bark, and countless smaller necessities. They are wealth standing upright. You allow enough timber for the repair. The clerk scratches the decision into wax. The tenant bows again, visibly relieved. Before leaving, he hesitates. There is another matter. Of course there is. The old hawthorn beside the road near the mill has lost a large limb in the same wind. The room changes slightly. Even the steward's assistant looks interested. You remember the reports from breakfast, the cracked cartwheel, the repeated trouble on that stretch of road. The tenant says the branch fell across the ditch but did not block the road. He asks whether it should be cut up for firewood. One of your attendants quietly makes the sign of the cross. Some swear that lone hawthorns standing beside old roads should never be cut without necessity. In villages, such trees can gather stories over generations. They may mark an ancient boundary, a burial place, a shrine long vanished, or simply a spot where enough strange events have occurred that nobody wishes to be the person who tests the tale. No one can quite agree whether this particular hawthorn is feared because of an old story or because everyone has forgotten the story and kept the fear. You decide the fallen limb can be removed, but the living tree itself is to remain untouched. The steward's assistant nods. A practical solution. And should spirits actually be keeping accounts? A diplomatic one. The second man steps forward. His matter is more urgent but simpler. The farm's grain cart has broken another wheel. The same cart. You almost smile. Apparently it has returned to public life with admirable persistence. The wheel failed while carrying sacks toward the mill. No one was injured, but the load had to be transferred to another wagon, delaying the grinding of flour. The wheelwright says the hub needs replacing entirely rather than patching again. You ask whether the cart was overloaded. The man looks toward the floor. That is answer enough. The steward's assistant sighs in the patient manner of someone who has been expecting this exact confession since sunrise. You authorize a proper repair and instruct that the cart not be loaded beyond what the wheelwright recommends. This produces another careful bow. Whether anyone will obey after 3 weeks is a separate matter. More people enter gradually. A widow from the village asks whether she may delay part of a rent payment until after her eldest cow calves. A shepherd reports a section of flooded track near the north field. A messenger from the reeve brings word that market tolls collected 2 days earlier were lower than expected because heavy rain kept several traders away. You hear each matter slowly. Not every decision belongs entirely to you, but the private life of a noblewoman is far more tangled with estate business than songs usually admit, especially when a husband is travelling, hunting, attending court, inspecting distant lands, or simply occupied elsewhere. Household authority does not vanish. It settles into the hands of whoever remains competent enough to hold it. You ask about the widow's rent. Her household has paid reliably for years. You allow the delay. The clerk notes it. You ask about the flooded track. 2 men can clear the ditch if the ground softens enough by midday. You authorize the labour. The clerk notes that too. Then comes the market toll. Coins gathered from stallholders, merchants, carts, and animals passing into market can provide useful revenue. But tolls also depend upon weather, roads, harvest, and whether merchants decide another town is worth the trouble. The messenger produces a small leather purse. Coins clink inside. You count them with the steward's assistant. Silver pennies worn at the edges. Money's useful, but much of your world still moves through rents and grain, labour obligations, livestock, produce, cloth, and favours owed over years. A household's wealth does not always sit neatly in a chest. Sometimes it is a field, sometimes a mill, sometimes 12 hens delivered at Michaelmas, sometimes a tenant who has repaired your roof every spring for 20 years. By the time the final villager departs, the room smells strongly of damp wool and wood smoke. The dog has fallen asleep beside the hearth. Your hands are warm, but your shoulders feel the quiet fatigue of listening. Outside, a cart creaks through the gate. You hear the wheel complain against the stones. Everyone in the room looks toward the sound. For one brief moment, nobody says anything. Then the steward's assistant murmurs that it is not the same cart. You're strangely relieved. Beyond the gatehouse, bells carry faintly over the winter fields, and somewhere along the muddy road beside the old hawthorn, men are already preparing to move a fallen branch while leaving the tree itself standing exactly where generations before them decided it was wiser not to interfere. The smell of damp wool follows you from the business chamber into the passage, but it fades as you turn toward a warmer part of the household where another scent begins to take its place. Rosemary, then sage, then something sharper that catches at the back of your throat. The still room lies near enough to the kitchens to borrow their heat, but far enough away that delicate herbs are not forever coated in grease and smoke. Its door stands open, and warm air spills into the corridor carrying the mingled fragrance of dried plants, honey, vinegar, beeswax, and the faint medicinal bitterness of things that have been boiled for purposes nobody particularly wishes to discuss over breakfast. You enter. Bundles of herbs hang upside down from rafters and pegs: lavender, rue, mint, sage, rosemary, fennel, perhaps comfrey and yarrow, their leaves curled with drying. Small glazed pots line a shelf. Linen packets sit inside wicker baskets. Wooden spoons, mortars, pestles, cloth strainers, and narrow-necked bottles crowd a work table beneath the window. This room is one of the quieter centres of household knowledge. Not all noblewomen prepare remedies with their own hands, and certainly not every lady spends her mornings grinding herbs like an enthusiastic village healer, but overseeing medicines, preserves, scented waters, salves, and domestic treatments can fall naturally within the sphere of female household management. Your senior attendant is already here. So is an older woman who has served the family long enough that nobody remembers exactly when she first arrived. She has the calm authority of someone who has delivered babies, treated burns, bandaged hands, and watched several young physicians confidently recommend treatments that everyone else then had to survive. She gestures toward a bowl. Inside is a mixture of honey and crushed herbs intended for a kitchen servant with a persistent cough. Honey is valued not only for sweetness but for soothing wounds and throats. Sage may be used in gargles or infusions. Horehound appears in cough preparations. Plantain leaves may be applied to minor injuries. Comfrey is associated with healing bruises and broken bones, though no herb can politely persuade a badly shattered limb to become reasonable again. Some remedies are practical. Some are hopeful. Some occupy the comfortable medieval territory between the two. You lean over another pot. This one contains an ointment made from animal fat, beeswax, and herbs. It is being warmed near the coals until the ingredients soften together. The old woman explains that it will be used for cracked hands. Cold weather is hard on skin. Servants wash, carry, scrub, haul water, handle rope, work with ash, chop wood, and spend hours moving between heat and freezing air. A simple salve may be worth more to them than a physician's speech delivered in excellent Latin. Beside the ointment lies a narrow leather case. You know what's inside before it is opened. Leeches. The dog, who has again followed you despite no invitation, approaches the table, sniffs once, and retreats. For the first time today, its judgment appears medically sound. Bloodletting is a familiar treatment, based on ideas about balancing the body's humours. Physicians and barber surgeons may open a vein directly, while leeches can be applied in particular circumstances. Certain calendars even suggest favourable and unfavourable days for bleeding depending on the moon, season, or position of the stars. No one can quite agree whether the moon truly cares what happens to a vein in your household, but enough learned men have written confidently about the matter that the question receives serious attention. You are shown a small almanac. Its pages contain marks indicating days considered suitable for various treatments. The old attendant regards it skeptically. She prefers to look at the patient. This, you suspect, is one reason people keep coming to her. A maid enters, carrying a folded cloth around one hand. She burned 2 fingers while moving an iron pot near the kitchen hearth. The injury is not severe, but the skin is red and painful. The older woman seats her near the table. Cool water first, then a gentle application of honey and salve. No elaborate ceremony. No heroic pronouncements. The maid visibly relaxes. You watch. Domestic medicine often begins exactly this way, with observation, clean cloth, warmth or coolness, food, rest, and whatever trusted remedy is available. But not every treatment is so sensible. On one shelf lies a charm written on a narrow strip of parchment. The words are religious rather than openly magical, invoking saints and sacred names for protection against fever. Such charms may be worn around the neck, sewn into clothing, or placed near a sick bed. Boundaries between prayer, medicine, and superstition are not as clean here as later centuries might wish them to be. Some swear that a certain prayer repeated 3 times while tying 9 knots in thread can ease a stubborn fever. Others insist that the thread must be red. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the colour matters. The old woman says dryly that keeping the patient warm and giving broth also tends to help. You like her more every time she speaks. On another table, herbs are being sorted into bundles for winter use, lavender for scent and soothing baths, mint for digestion, fennel for the stomach. Rue used cautiously, because plants that heal in one quantity may harm in another. That distinction matters. Medieval herb lore can be sophisticated, but it is not harmless simply because it is old. A household practitioner learns through inherited knowledge, experience, warnings, accidents, and repetition. A small jar contains powdered material said to be useful against toothache. You ask what is in it. Clove, salt, and something the old woman refuses to identify until she's checked the jar herself. This is reassuring. The dog returns to investigate a basket of dried apples. Its medical interests have improved significantly. You move toward the window. Outside, the inner court shines wetly beneath a thin wash of winter light. A servant carries firewood toward the kitchens. Another crosses with a basket of onions. Beyond the wall, the old road runs toward the villages, the mill, and eventually the monastery whose bells have marked your entire morning. You think of how remedies travel along those roads too. Pilgrims bring herbs from distant regions. Merchants bring spices used as medicines as well as flavorings. Monasteries cultivate plants in physic gardens. Village women carry knowledge from mothers and grandmothers. Learned texts preserve remedies copied by ink-stained scribes. And all of it arrives here, in this warm, crowded room, where honey thickens beside the hearth and linen bandages dry on a wooden rack. Before leaving, you authorize the purchase of more clean linen for medical use, and ask that the coughing servant receive broth as well as the herbal mixture. The old woman nods approvingly. The maid with the burned fingers flexes them carefully. The dog steals one dried apple slice and escapes into the passage. Nobody pursues it. You follow more slowly, carrying the scent of rosemary and warm beeswax with you, while behind the still-room door another mortar begins its steady rhythm against stone. The steady knock of mortar against stone fades behind you as you leave the still-room, and for a few moments the passage seems unusually quiet. Then the little dog appears from around the corner. It still has part of the stolen dried apple in its mouth. You stop. It stops. You look at the apple. The dog looks at you. Neither of you raises the matter. There are some disputes in a noble household that are simply not worth bringing before the manor court. You continue toward the solar, and the dog falls in beside you with the confident step of an animal that believes the entire incident has been settled in its favour. By now the manor has fully entered the working day. Servants move through the passages carrying folded cloth, baskets, jugs, bundles of firewood, and messages that seem to multiply whenever anyone attempts to sit down. Somewhere below, a carpenter hammers steadily. From the kitchens comes the dull chopping of vegetables being prepared for the midday meal. The smell of onions briefly reaches the stairwell, followed by wood smoke and roasting meat. You climb a short flight of worn stone steps. The solar waits beyond an oak door on the sunnier side of the building. Its name suits it. Even in winter, this room receives more daylight than most of the manor, and the narrow glazed windows allow a pale wash of brightness to fall across the floor. Glass itself is expensive, so the panes are small and imperfect, bubbling and wavering slightly, turning the outside world into something softened and uncertain. The room is warmer than the corridors. A fire burns in the hearth. Wall hangings cover some of the stone, reducing drafts and making the room feel less like an exceptionally well-furnished cave. Several women are already gathered there. One sits with an embroidery frame resting before her. Another spins wool with a spindle. A younger attendant sorts coloured threads from a small wooden box. Near the window, a wicker basket holds unfinished sewing, scraps of cloth, and a pair of shears. You settle into a cushioned chair beside the hearth. Your shoulders loosen almost immediately. This is one of the quieter parts of the day. Not idle, exactly. Idleness is rarely admired openly, especially in women responsible for a large household. Even leisure is expected to look productive. Needles move. Thread passes through linen. Wool twists between fingers. A noblewoman may supervise embroidery, sew personally, mend finer garments, oversee decorative work for a chapel, or help prepare gifts for relatives and guests. Some pieces require months of patient labour. A length of linen is brought to you. The design has already been marked lightly curling leaves, small flowers, perhaps the outline of a bird. You choose an indigo thread. The needle passes through the cloth, then back again. Slowly. There is something hypnotic about it. Around you, conversation begins in the same gradual way. No formal announcement. No sudden subject. Simply words settling into the warmth. One woman mentions the widow whose rent you delayed earlier. Another says her cow is expected to calve soon. Someone else reports that the miller has complained about the condition of the road again. You continue stitching. Apparently the broken cartwheel has achieved greater fame than some knights. The conversation shifts. A servant from the gatehouse claims that a pilgrim passed through yesterday carrying a badge from Canterbury and insisting he had seen a man healed of lameness after touching a saint's shrine. Another woman says her cousin once knew someone whose swollen hand improved after a pilgrimage. A third quietly points out that the swelling may simply have gone down during the journey. Some swear that touching a pilgrim badge to a shrine allows it to carry a small portion of the shrine's blessing home with its owner. Such badges may later be pinned near a bed, sewn to clothing, or kept among treasured household objects. No one can quite agree whether the power lies in the metal, the saint, the journey, or the faith of the person carrying it. You guide the needle through another stitch. Outside the window, a crow lands on the roof of the covered walkway. One of the women notices. She watches it for several seconds. A crow arriving alone can mean different things depending on which village grandmother is consulted. Trouble, a visitor, news, weather, death. if the storyteller is feeling dramatic. You glance toward the bird. It scratches at the roof, pecks at something invisible, and flies away. You decide this particular omen probably means that a crow was hungry. The older attendant from the still room would approve. A spindle drops. It rolls beneath a bench. The little dog immediately pursues it. This becomes far more exciting than anything the animal has encountered all morning. The spindle rolls one way. The dog slides after it. A woman lifts her feet just in time. For several seconds, the peaceful solar is transformed into a tiny tournament fought between an enthusiastic dog and an object designed for wool. The spindle wins. It lodges under a chest. The dog sits in front of it, panting, entirely satisfied. You return to your embroidery. The rhythm resumes. Pull. Tighten. Turn the cloth. Choose another thread. You notice how much of women's life is preserved in objects like these. A sleeve sewn for a daughter. An embroidered altar cloth. A purse given at marriage. A linen cap worn until the edge frays. A blanket repaired so often that the repairs become part of its pattern. Men's names may appear more often in charters and chronicles, but rooms like this hold another kind of record, written in wool, linen, wax, herbs, keys, and memory. The conversation drifts toward marriages. Not yours, someone else's, which naturally makes the subject safer. A neighbouring household is said to be considering a match between a widowed knight and the daughter of a minor lord. The girl is reportedly pleased, or unhappy, or has never met him. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though this has not prevented the story from reaching 3 villages and your solar before midday. One attendant says the knight is kind. Another says he's miserly. A third says his household makes excellent pear preserves. This last detail receives more serious consideration than the others. Marriage alliances concern property, inheritance, kinship, reputation, and politics. But people still notice whether the kitchen is any good. You suppress a smile. The fire settles lower. A servant adds another log. The room fills briefly with a sharp scent of fresh wood smoke. Your fingers have warmed enough that the needle moves easily now. The indigo pattern has begun to take shape, a narrow stem curling around a tiny stitched flower. You hear monastery bells again, more distant than before. The sound tells you that morning is passing. Soon the household will gather for dinner, the largest meal of the day, and the quieter world of the solar will give way to rank. Servants, trenchers, conversation, and the public performance of the great hall. But not yet, for now you remain near the hearth. The dog has fallen asleep beside the trapped spindle. The women continue sewing. Outside, winter light rests pale upon the courtyard. And for a little while, your day narrows gently to the pull of thread through linen, the murmur of familiar voices, and the soft crackle of the fire beside your chair. The monastery bell fades across the winter fields, and almost at once the solar begins to loosen around you. Needles are tucked safely into cloth. Thread is wound back around small cards or wooden spools. The spindle is finally rescued from beneath the chest, though the little dog watches the operation with the injured expression of a knight deprived of his rightful prisoner. One attendant folds the unfinished embroidery carefully and places it inside the wicker basket. The midday meal is approaching. In your household, dinner is the main meal of the day, and unlike the quiet breakfast taken near the private hearth, it belongs partly to the public life of the manor. You rise. The warmth of the solar clings to you for only a few steps. Then the passage steals it away. You move through corridors where servants are already hurrying toward the great hall with pitchers, trenchers, cloths, bowls, and platters, The air changes as you descend. Smoke grows thicker. Voices become more numerous. The smell of roasting meat mixes with onions, bread, ale, and damp wool brought in from outside. By the time you reach the hall entrance, the room is alive. The great hall is not a silent ceremonial chamber waiting patiently for noble footsteps. It is the working heart of the household. Men and women cross between tables. Dogs lurk hopefully along the edges. Servants carry food from the kitchen passage. Retainers and guests take their places according to rank, familiarity, and whatever delicate social calculation has been made for the day. At the upper end stands the raised dais. Your place is there. The difference of only a few steps in height is enough to announce hierarchy without anyone saying a word. A cloth covers the high table. Better vessels are set there. The bread is finer. The seating is more comfortable. Below, long boards rest on trestles for lesser household members and guests. Where a person sits matters. Who sits beside whom matters. Even the distance from the salt may matter. No one can quite agree whether every household observes the old idea of placing people above the salt and below the salt with perfect consistency. But salt itself is certainly valuable, and seating arrangements reveal rank with uncomfortable clarity. You reach your place and sit. The little dog has been permitted into the hall, which means it immediately forgets every lesson it has ever been taught about dignity. It begins searching for opportunity. A servant approaches with water and a basin so that hands may be washed before eating. Clean hands at table are expected, particularly among those claiming refinement. Water is poured over your fingers, and a linen towel is offered. This ritual is not merely practical. Eating often involves fingers. Knives are common personal tools. Spoons appear for soups and soft dishes. Forks, where known at all, are hardly the everyday companions they will someday become. The first dishes arrive: bread, then pottage, then meat accompanied by sauces sharpened with herbs, vinegar, or spice. There may be poultry today, perhaps capon or hen, along with roasted or boiled meat depending on what the kitchens have prepared. Root vegetables and onions appear more quietly, because medieval cooks have never received the message that future historians will want every meal arranged neatly into food groups. A trencher is set before you. Today it is bread rather than wood. Thick slices of stale, dense bread can serve as edible plates, absorbing juices and sauces. Afterward, depending on custom, the trencher may be eaten, passed to someone of lower rank, or distributed to the poor. You cut a small portion of meat with your knife. At the lower tables, conversation rises gradually. A steward moves among the servants. Cups are filled. Bread is distributed. Nobody begins simply because hunger has become impatient. There is order to the meal, even if the order occasionally looks suspiciously like controlled confusion. Grace has been said. Now food travels. Platters may be shared between diners according to rank. Courtesy expects restraint. A well-mannered person does not seize the best piece, wipe greasy fingers on the tablecloth, or attack a shared dish as though winter famine has already been declared. There are rules about not dipping bitten food back into common sauces. Rules about not picking teeth unpleasantly at table. Rules about not blowing one's nose into the cloth. The existence of these rules suggests that somebody, somewhere, has done all of them. Medieval etiquette manuals are often less a picture of universal good manners than evidence of what people needed to be repeatedly told not to do. The thought is oddly comforting. A musician near the wall begins playing softly. Not a grand performance, just enough sound to sit beneath conversation. You notice the steward's assistant speaking quietly with the kitchen officer near the sideboard. The subject is almost certainly the smoked fish supply, because apparently the fish from breakfast has developed into a continuing administrative saga. You leave them to it. A servant places sauce beside you. It contains pepper, so the cook has found some after all. You suspect this may be his quiet response to the morning inventory. The dog sits beneath the table. Something falls. Perhaps by accident, perhaps not. The dog removes the evidence. Across the hall, a visiting minor knight speaks to one of your household officers about conditions on the southern road. Rain has turned stretches of it into mud deep enough to slow loaded wagons. A bridge near a stream needs repair. Merchants arriving from the market have complained about tolls at a neighbouring Lord's Crossing. Travel, once again, is proving less romantic than the song suggests. Some swear that sharing salt with a stranger establishes a special bond of trust. Others claim that spilling it invites bad luck and should be answered by tossing a pinch over the shoulder. A young servant near the lower table accidentally knocks the edge of a salt dish. Only a few grains scatter. He freezes. Then, believing himself unnoticed, pinches a tiny amount and flicks it behind him. It lands on another servant. You look away before your expression betrays you. The meal continues. Ale passes in pitchers. Some guests drink wine, though it is more costly and depends upon region, trade, and the household's means. The great hall grows warmer from bodies, food, torches, and the central activity of service. You watch the movement around you. This meal is nourishment, certainly, but it is also display. The quality of bread says something. The number of dishes says something. The cloth, the plate, the servants, the seating, the generosity shown to guests all communicate the strength and order of the household. A noble family must appear capable of abundance. Yet you know what lies behind that appearance. The storerooms, the candle counts, the grain sacks, the missing napkins, the reduced fish. Public plenty rests upon private calculation. The final dishes are simpler. Cheese, fruit kept from autumn stores, perhaps small baked pastries if the kitchen has been generous. The pear preserves mentioned earlier in the solar are not present, which seems unfair after the amount of attention they received. When the meal ends, hands are washed again. Servants begin clearing boards and gathering trenchers. Some edible leftovers will go elsewhere in the household. Some may become alms. Bones and scraps find uses you would rather not examine too closely while still seated. The musicians stop. People begin to rise in careful order. You remain for a moment at the high table, watching the hall slowly change from ceremonial meal back into working space. The dog emerges from beneath the table looking suspiciously satisfied. Your public duties are not finished. Already near the far side of the hall, several people wait with petitions. The great hall empties slowly after dinner, but it never becomes truly quiet. Servants lift trenchers and bowls from the tables. Wooden benches scrape across the floor. A pair of dogs inspect the rushes with professional seriousness, searching for anything the human world has carelessly surrendered. Near the hearth, one of the musicians wraps his instrument in cloth, while a kitchen boy carries away a pitcher nearly as large as his torso. You remain near the upper end of the hall. Several people are waiting. Not guests now. Petitioners. Some have matters that could have been taken to the steward. Others have been sent upward because the question touches household authority, local custom, or property belonging directly to the manor, with your husband away from the estate on business. The weight of such decisions settles more visibly upon you. A stool is brought near the hearth. You sit. The little dog settles at your feet, apparently convinced that legal administration is best conducted while leaning against your slipper. The first petitioner is a household servant. She is young, though fully grown, and twists the edge of her apron while speaking. Her complaint concerns another servant who has accused her of taking 2 lengths of wool thread from the sewing stores. 2 lengths of thread. Entire kingdoms have probably collapsed with less solemnity. The steward stands nearby, arms folded. You ask whether the thread was actually missing? It was. You ask whether anyone saw the girl take it? No one did. You ask whether the missing thread has been found. After some hesitation, the steward admits that 1 bundle was later discovered beneath a chest in the solar. You think of the dog, the runaway spindle, and the general ability of household objects to migrate without permission. The second bundle remains unexplained. The accusing servant is brought forward. She insists that the first woman had complained recently about needing thread to mend a sleeve. This is true. It is also not proof. The rules of a household are strict because materials matter. Wool, linen, wax, food, tools, metal fittings, and even scraps have value. A servant stealing repeatedly can harm more than accounts. Suspicion spreads quickly in a community where everyone lives close together. But public accusation is dangerous too. You ask the steward to inspect the sewing stores properly before punishment is considered. The young woman lowers her head in relief. Some swear that a thief can be discovered by placing names inside small balls of clay and dropping them into holy water, the guilty person's ball behaving differently from the rest. Another old custom calls for a suspected thief to touch an object placed upon an altar and swear innocence before God. No one can quite agree whether fear of divine punishment reveals truth more reliably than careful questioning. You decide careful questioning deserves a chance first. The next case comes from outside the household. 2 tenant farmers stand before you, both muddy around the hems, both wearing expressions usually found on men who have spent too long explaining boundaries. Their dispute concerns a narrow strip of meadow beside a stream. Each claims the right to cut hay there. One says his father used the strip. The other says his grandfather did. This is not helpful. The manor court depends heavily on custom. Rights may be remembered through repeated use rather than written documents alone. Who grazes animals where? Who gathers wood? Who repairs a bridge? Who owes labour during harvest? All can rest on traditions older than anyone present. You ask whether older villagers can remember the meadow's use. 3 can. Unfortunately, they disagree. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether this is because memories have faded or because every witness quietly favours a different family. The steward produces a worn account roll. An ink-stained clerk unrolls it carefully on the table. The parchment curls at the edges. There is a note from years earlier referring to a meadow beside the stream, though the description is vague enough to make everyone stare at it longer than necessary. You lean closer. The clerk reads the passage aloud. The meadow appears to have been divided seasonally. 1 tenant family had rights after midsummer mowing. The other had rights later for grazing. A murmur moves through the waiting servants. The argument, it seems, has survived because both families are partially correct. This is often the most inconvenient kind of truth. You order the old custom restored for the coming year and ask the steward to have the arrangement entered clearly in the court record. Both men bow. Neither looks entirely victorious. This may be the best outcome available. Next comes a widow asking permission to collect fallen branches from a section of woodland normally reserved more carefully. You recognize her. She's not the same widow whose rent you delayed earlier, but she lives near the northern edge of the estate and has 2 grown daughters in service elsewhere. Her firewood is nearly gone. Winter is not finished. Woodland rites are not trivial, but neither is cold. You permit her to gather dead wood on 2 specified days, provided she cuts no living timber. She thanks you repeatedly. The clerk notes the decision. A small act of mercy still requires administration. Another petitioner asks about a pig that wandered into a neighbour's garden. The pig ate several cabbages. The owner claims the fence was poor. The gardener claims the pig is evil. The steward looks tired. You ask whether the pig has escaped before. 3 times. The dog wakes at this information. Perhaps it recognizes a fellow professional. You order the owner to repair the damaged garden and keep the animal properly enclosed. No theological investigation into the pig's moral character is authorized. By now, afternoon light has shifted across the hall windows. The floor near the entrance is marked with fresh mud from everyone who's come inside. Rushes crunch softly under boots. The hearth burns lower than it did during dinner, and smoke gathers faintly beneath the dark beams. The petitions continue, but their rhythm slows. A servant requests permission to visit a sick mother in a nearby village. Granted. A tenant asks whether part of a labour obligation may be postponed because his eldest son has injured an ankle. The steward confirms the family has otherwise fulfilled its duties. Granted. A minor dispute between 2 kitchen workers is returned to the cook with the suggestion that he solve it before it somehow becomes a matter of feudal law. That earns the faintest smile from the clerk. Your role here is not that of a great judge beneath banners and trumpets. It is quieter. You preserve household order. You interpret custom. You decide when rules bend and when they must hold. You listen long enough to discover that many disputes are not really about cabbages, thread, meadows, or firewood. They are about dignity, fear, winter, memory, and the deep human preference for believing that one's own version of events is unusually reasonable. When the final petitioner bows and leaves, the clerk sands the fresh ink on his record. The steward gathers the rolls. You rise slowly from the stool. Outside the hall the afternoon waits pale and cold. Somewhere deeper in the manor an ink-stained scribe is already preparing the letters and seals that will carry your next decisions far beyond these stone walls. The clerk's ink has barely dried on the afternoon petitions when you leave the great hall and turn toward a smaller writing chamber tucked behind the solar. The room is narrow, warmer than the outer passages, and crowded with the quiet tools of administration. A sloping desk stands beneath a window of uneven glass. Rolls of parchment rest in wooden compartments. Small horns of ink sit beside quills trimmed to fine points. Wax tablets, scraps of cord, a knife for sharpening pens, and a shallow dish of sand occupy nearly every remaining patch of table. The household scribe is already waiting. His fingers are stained dark around the nails. No amount of careful washing seems able to remove the evidence of his profession. He bows, then settles onto his stool with the resigned patience of a man who knows that one dictated letter has a mysterious tendency to become 6. You take your place beside the hearth. The little dog enters behind you and circles the legs of the writing table before choosing a patch of warmth beneath the window. The first letter concerns the grain cart. Of course it does. You dictate slowly, instructing the reeve at the Western farm that the damaged wheel must be replaced rather than patched again, and that future loads are to remain within whatever limit the wheelwright considers sensible. The scribe pauses. He glances up. You add that this instruction is not open to creative interpretation. His mouth twitches. The quill scratches across parchment. Writing is slow enough that thought must often wait for the hand. The scribe forms each line carefully, dipping the quill, shaking away excess ink, then continuing in measured strokes. Parchment is too costly to waste through carelessness. Mistakes can be scraped away with a knife if caught early. Larger mistakes become memorable. You watch the letters appear. Most household correspondence is not grand diplomacy, it is instruction, confirmation, complaint, request, invitation, reminder, and the endless effort to make distant people do something approximately when they were asked to do it. The next letter goes to a neighbouring manor. A relative is expected to travel through the region in several weeks, and you wish to know whether the bridge near their southern boundary remains passable. Recent rains have swollen the stream. A messenger reported that one plank is loose. Another insists the bridge is perfectly sound. No one can quite agree whether this means the bridge is safe or merely that the second messenger crossed it without falling through. You dictate a polite inquiry. Polite correspondence is an art. You do not write, "Your bridge may collapse." You write something closer to, "We have heard varying accounts regarding the condition of the crossing and would value your household's more certain knowledge." The medieval world runs on softened accusations. The scribe continues. Outside the window, the afternoon is already beginning its slow descent toward evening. Winter days do not linger. Light drains early from fields, roads, and courtyards, forcing travellers to judge distance carefully. You imagine the messenger who will carry these letters. He will leave through the gate with the packets tucked beneath his cloak or secured inside a leather pouch. He will follow a road that is not truly a road in the modern sense, but a succession of ruts, packed earth, stones, puddles, woodland tracks, bridge crossings, and local memory. In wet weather the ruts deepen. In frost they harden into ridges. A rider can make better speed than a cart, but only if the horse remains sound and nobody sends him confidently toward a ford that ceased to be shallow yesterday. Another letter concerns the widow whose rent you delayed. A short note is dictated to the reeve confirming the arrangement, so that nobody later decides her mercy was merely an interesting rumour. The scribe writes. Then comes correspondence to a monastery. The nearby abbey owns land bordering part of your estate, and there has been uncertainty over repairs to a drainage ditch where the two properties meet. The ditch has the remarkable ability to belong to whichever party is not currently being asked to repair it. You dictate carefully. The monks are to be reminded of an earlier agreement. The scribe searches through a bundle of older documents and eventually produces a copy of the relevant note. Its edges are worn. A seal once hung from the bottom but has partly broken away. The surviving wax bears only part of an impression. Seals matter because many people cannot personally recognize handwriting, and signatures are not used in quite the later manner you might expect. A seal can authenticate a document, identify authority, and transform a piece of writing into something far harder to ignore. Your own seal is brought from a locked box. It is small enough to hold in one hand, carved with the device associated with your household. A servant warms sealing wax. The scent rises faintly sweet and resinous. Some seals use beeswax mixed with pigments and other materials, their colours varying by place, purpose, and rank. Red is common. Green may appear on particular formal documents. The exact habits are not always consistent from one region to another. You press the matrix into softened wax, firmly, then lift it. The impression remains. It is a strangely satisfying act. A few seconds of pressure, and authority becomes visible. The dog wakes and watches as if unimpressed. You suspect it would prefer authority expressed through dried apples. The next message is shorter and more personal. It goes to a female cousin staying at another noble household several days away. You ask after her health and mention that winter stores are holding well, though you avoid discussing the smoked fish in detail because some household crises deserve privacy. You also ask whether a travelling merchant she mentioned earlier still intends to visit your district with fine thread, needles, and imported spices. Trade moves along the same uncertain routes as letters. A merchant may pass through walled towns, pay market tolls, sleep in inns, bargain for ferry crossings, and pause at monasteries or roadside hospices. Pilgrims, traders, clerics, soldiers, messengers, labourers, and wandering craftsmen share stretches of road, each carrying information as readily as goods. News travels in mouths before it reaches parchment. The scribe sands the letter lightly. While he works, you examine a pilgrim badge hanging from a peg near the window. It belongs to him, acquired years ago on a journey to a shrine. The thin metal image is worn at the edges. Some travellers believe badges touched to shrines retain a protective blessing. Others pin them to bags simply as proof that they survived the road. Some swear that a pilgrim carrying the sign of a powerful saint is less likely to be robbed. Even now, it's hard to tell whether robbers respect saints or merely prefer victims who look richer. You return the badge to its peg. The letters are folded. Some are tied. Others are sealed. Names and destinations are repeated aloud so that the messenger cannot plausibly claim he was sent in the opposite direction by divine mystery. One packet will travel past a roadside shrine standing beside an old oak. Another will follow the pilgrim road toward the abbey and then turn south through forest. A third must cross the bridge whose structural reputation is currently being discussed in 3 households. You watch the finished letters arranged in a neat stack. Small pieces of parchment, small commands, small threads stretching outward from this manor into a wider medieval landscape. The scribe rubs his stained fingers together and sighs. You ask whether there is anything else. He looks toward another pile of parchment. There is always something else. But the afternoon light is fading, and for now the remaining letters can wait. You rise. Outside the writing chamber, the air smells colder than before. Somewhere beyond the walls, riders will soon be carrying your words past shrines, mills, fields, villages, toll gates, and monastery bells, while you remain behind the stone walls where another part of the day is already drawing you toward the outer ward. The outer ward cools you into colder air before evening settles fully over the manor. A servant brings your fur-lined cloak from a peg near the stair, and you draw it around your shoulders while another attendant fastens the clasp at your throat. The weight is comforting. Fur is expensive, practical, and a visible sign of rank. But at this moment you care less about what it says to anyone else than about the simple fact that the wind cannot pass through it quite so easily. You leave the warmer passage. Cold meets your face at once. The little dog hesitates at the doorway. For perhaps the first time all day, it appears to reconsider its devotion. Then it follows. You cross beneath the inner gate and step into the outer ward. The sky has deepened from pale grey to the muted blue of late winter afternoon. The light is already thinning along the roofs. Wet stone reflects the last brightness, and patches of old frost survive where walls have kept the sun away. Mud grips the yard. Not dramatic mud. Not the heroic mud of battlefields and ballads. Ordinary, patient, deeply committed mud. It gathers around wagon ruts, hoof prints, and doorways, waiting for any person wearing respectable shoes. You choose your steps carefully. Near the stables, several horses are being watered before night. Their breath rises in white clouds. One stamps against the ground while a groom checks the iron nails in a shoe. Another animal stands beneath a wool covering, ears twitching while its mane is combed free of straw. Horses are wealth, transport, status, labour, and constant expense. They need oats, hay, bedding, tack, shoes, grooms, shelter, and attention. A noble household cannot simply own fine horses and admire them from windows. Animals have an impressive ability to transform prestige into daily work. You pause beside a dark bay mare. She turns her head toward you. The groom bows and reports that she has recovered from a slight stiffness in one foreleg. He's been rubbing it with warmed oil and walking her gently. Some stablemen also keep charms nailed near stall doors of bits of iron, small crosses, sprigs of rowan, or other objects believed to ward off illness and ill luck. You notice a horseshoe fixed above one doorway. Its open ends point upward. Some swear that hanging a horseshoe this way catches good fortune rather than allowing it to spill away. Others insist the opposite orientation is better. No one can quite agree whether luck is supposed to be collected, poured over the doorway, or simply left alone. The horse seems unconcerned. You move on. The kitchen building stands nearby, separated enough from the main residential chambers to reduce the danger of fire and the punishment of constant smoke. Warm air pours briefly from an open door, carrying the rich smell of onions, roasting meat, yeast, and something sweet simmering with spice. A kitchen servant hurries past carrying a wicker basket of turnips. Another follows with a wooden bucket. Inside, iron hooks hang near the hearth. Pots sit over coals. A long-handled ladle rests against the wall. Supper preparations are already beginning, even though the household has only recently finished its midday dinner. Feeding a large household is less a series of meals than a continuous campaign against hunger. You continue toward the storehouses. Here the yard becomes quieter. Oak doors stand shut behind iron hasps. Barrels are stacked beneath an overhanging roof. Bundles of firewood rise against one wall, sorted by size. A servant checks a cartload of split logs as it arrives from estate woodland. You think again of the widow permitted to gather deadwood. To a wealthy household, a bundle of sticks may seem small. To someone with a cold hearth in January, it can mean the difference between sleep and misery. A chapel wall borders the far side of the yard. The stone is damp and dark near the ground. Small patches of moss cling to the mortar. A carved cross above a side doorway has worn smooth at the edges from weather. Two villagers stand nearby, speaking with a household servant. They have brought eggs and a small basket of late-stored apples as part of dues owed from a nearby holding. The apples are wrinkled but sound. The eggs are counted carefully. One villager bows when you pass. You stop long enough to ask whether the north track remains flooded. He says the ditch was cleared after noon and the water has begun to fall. That small piece of news pleases you more than you expect. The day is full of such modest victories. A ditch drains. A widow receives time. A horse improves. A wheel, perhaps, will finally be repaired properly. The great machinery of noble life often turns on things no minstrel would ever bother to sing about. You leave the hard-packed yard and enter the enclosed garden beyond the chapel. In summer it would smell of herbs, flowers, fruit, and warm earth. Now it is mostly bare. Low beds lie dark beneath winter damp. Rosemary survives near a sheltered wall. Sage leaves remain grey-green. Dried stalks rise from one corner where summer flowers once grew. A gardener has laid straw over the roots of more delicate plants. You walk slowly along the narrow path. The garden is private enough to offer a brief feeling of separation from the household. Though the walls do not silence everything, you still hear a hammer from the stable. A cart creaks through the outer gate. Somewhere a goose objects loudly to an arrangement no one else understands. Near the far wall stands a small rosemary bush. Your attendant touches one leaf and releases its scent. Rosemary is associated with memory, protection, marriage, and mourning in different places and times. It can appear in household remedies, cooking, ceremony, and gardens. Some swear that a flourishing rosemary bush beside a house means the woman of that household rules there. You look back toward the manor. You decide not to mention this particular belief to the steward. The dog disappears beneath a dormant rosebush and merges with mud on its nose. So much for noble dignity. The light continues fading. You return toward the ward as torches begin appearing near important doorways. At the outer gate, watchmen are changing position before full darkness. One checks the heavy wooden bar. Another peers beyond the wall toward the road leading away through fields and low woodland. The road itself is barely visible now. A final cart approaches slowly from the village, its wheels grinding over frozen ruts. The driver calls to the horses as he passes beneath the gate. No broken wheel? You consider this encouraging. Beyond the walls, the landscape darkens by layers. Fields become grey. Trees become black shapes. Mist begins collecting near the river. Then the abbey bell sounds. The note crosses the cold air with remarkable clarity. Everyone hears it. The groom, the servants, the watchmen, the villagers departing through the gate. Even the little dog raises its head. You remain still for several breaths beneath your fur-lined cloak while the sound fades into the coming evening. Then torchlight flickers against the stone. The gate begins to close, and you turn back toward the warmer rooms within, carrying cold hands, damp hems, and the smell of winter air into the manor with you. The oak door closes behind you, shutting out most of the outer ward's wind, though not all of it. Cold still clings to your cloak and damp hem as you return through the passage, and your hands ache faintly while warmth begins finding them again. A servant takes the fur-lined cloak. Another brings a cloth for the mud at your shoes. The little dog submits to no such ceremony and carries half the outer ward directly toward the solar on 4 muddy paws. You follow more slowly. By the time you enter, the room has changed from the quiet work chamber of mourning into a small evening gathering place. Beeswax candles stand on a table and in wall brackets, their flames steady where the shutters have been closed against draughts. The hearth has been built higher, and fresh logs settle into glowing coals with the occasional soft crack. Several visitors are waiting. Nothing about the gathering is grand. There are no trumpets, no packed benches, no elaborate feast. These are neighbouring gentlefolk, a widowed cousin travelling between estates, a cleric attached to another household, and one older knight who has stopped on his way home before darkness makes the roads unpleasant. Which is to say, more unpleasant. Cloaks hang near the door. Wet wool scents the room. You greet each guest according to rank and familiarity, exchanging courtesies that are warm without becoming careless. Hospitality is expected of a noble household, but hospitality itself follows rules. Seating matters. Attention matters. Who receives the better cup? Who is placed nearer the hearth? And who is offered the first portion from a dish can all carry meanings far beyond their practical importance. A servant brings warmed ale flavoured lightly with spice. Another offers small pieces of bread and cheese. This is not supper. It is simply enough to restore travellers who have spent several hours being personally insulted by winter roads. The older knight accepts his cup with both hands and immediately begins describing the route from the east. Mud near the mill, ice beside a shaded ford, a fallen tree near a roadside shrine, and, according to his groom, a stretch of road so deeply rutted that a horse stepping into it might emerge speaking a different dialect. You smile. The conversation turns naturally toward roads, because medieval travel seems capable of producing endless stories while rarely improving the roads themselves. The widowed cousin has brought something more interesting. From a small leather pouch, she produces a pilgrim badge. It is made from thin cast metal, perhaps lead or pewter, and bears the image of a saint associated with a shrine she visited the previous summer. The edges are slightly bent from travel. She passes it to you. The badge is cool against your palm. Pilgrim tokens like this may be pinned to hats, cloaks, or bags, visible signs that the wearer has reached a holy destination. Some are cheap enough for ordinary travellers, others are more carefully worked. They serve as memory, devotion, proof, and, occasionally, excellent material for stories told afterward beside someone else's hearth. Your cousin says the badge was touched to the saint's shrine. The cleric nods approvingly. The older knight says nothing. You notice that he is examining his ale. Some swear that an object touched to a sacred shrine carries a blessing home with it, extending the holiness of the place beyond the church itself. Others are more cautious. Even now, it is hard to tell whether every traveller believes precisely the same thing, or simply prefers not to argue with a successful pilgrimage. You return the badge. Your cousin then mentions another object seen at the shrine, a tooth said to belong to a saint. The cleric says this is entirely possible. The knight finally looks up. He asks how large the tooth was. The answer produces silence. Apparently it was unusually large. The knight observes, very gently, that the saint must have possessed remarkable jaws. The cleric clears his throat. This is the sort of theological difficulty best solved by drinking. You rescue the conversation by asking about the journey itself. Your cousin describes sleeping in a monastery guest house, crossing a crowded market town, and following stretches of pilgrim road where travellers exchanged news beside roadside fires. She remembers badges sewn onto hats, staffs worn smooth by hands, small leather bags, wooden bowls, and cloaks stained by dust and rain. She also remembers bedbugs. Pilgrimage, like holiness, does not always guarantee comfort. Your household's own questionable relic soon enters the conversation. The cleric has heard of it. Of course he has. News travels farther than carts. You explain that the family tradition identifies the small fragment in the chapel reliquary with a saint, though no surviving account explains exactly how it reached the manor. The widowed cousin recalls a version involving an ancestor returning from overseas. The older knight remembers hearing that it was purchased from a travelling priest. One attendant quietly says she's always heard that it was found inside an old chest after a roof repair. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The relic itself remains peacefully in the chapel, apparently untroubled by the competition. The conversation shifts toward neighbouring households. A marriage proposal has been discussed. A steward has left one estate after quarrelling with his lord. A merchant from the south may bring fine cloth before Candlemas. Someone has heard that a nearby abbey possesses a manuscript containing a remedy for fever involving fennel, prayer, and a quantity of wine large enough to make the fever temporarily irrelevant. You listen more than you speak. This is another form of work. A noblewoman is expected to understand relationships, remember kinship, judge what information matters, and distinguish harmless gossip from news that may affect land, marriage, hospitality, or alliances. Not every rumour deserves action, but ignoring every rumour would be equally foolish. A servant refreshes the candles. Another tends the hearth with iron fire tongs. The little dog, now dry enough to become socially ambitious again, moves from guest to guest collecting admiration. It eventually settles beside the widowed cousin who has made the tactical error of dropping a crumb. Outside, darkness has completed its work. The windows are black now. Only faint reflections of candle flames remain in the uneven glass. The watchmen beyond the outer gate will have lit their fires. The heavy bar will be set. Horses will be fed. Kitchen servants will already be carrying the first dishes toward preparation for the evening meal. But in the solar, time slows. I'll warms the hands. The fire lowers voices. Stories become gentler. The pilgrim badge catches one last flicker of candlelight before being returned to its pouch. Soon, your guests will rise and follow you towards supper. For the moment, though, everyone remains gathered around the hearth, wrapped in wool, rumour, and the soft security of walls closed firmly against the winter night. The gathering in the solar breaks apart gently rather than all at once. One guest finishes the last of the warmed ale. Another rises to stretch stiff knees. Your widowed cousin fastens the leather pouch containing her pilgrim badge, and the older knight draws his cloak closer before remembering that supper lies only a few corridors away, and that no further battle with the weather is required tonight. A servant opens the door. Warm air slips into the colder passage. You leave the hearth behind and move with the others toward the hall. The manor feels different after darkness. During daylight, passages lead somewhere practical: chapel, kitchen, storehouse, stable, writing room. At night, the same passages seem longer. Doorways become black rectangles. Torchlight touches only one section of wall at a time, leaving the next arch waiting in shadow. The scent of wet wool remains strong from the guests' cloaks. It mixes now with smoke, beeswax, roasting onions, and the faint sweetness of wine warmed with spice. Below, the evening meal is ready. Supper is lighter than the midday dinner. There is no need to repeat the full display of abundance that filled the hall earlier. The household has already eaten well, and evening food tends toward what is warming, convenient, and sufficient before sleep. You enter the hall. Most of the long tables remain, though fewer people sit at them now. Some servants have eaten separately. Others will take their meal after service. The upper table is laid more simply than before. Bread returns. It always returns. There is cheese, a thick vegetable pottage, leftover meat reheated with sauce, perhaps eggs, and a dish of onions cooked until soft. A small portion of fish appears as well, carefully controlled after the morning's inventory. You notice it. So does the steward's assistant. Neither of you comments. The smoked fish has survived another administrative crisis. You take your place. A servant pours warmed wine into a cup for one guest and ale for another. Your own drink is warmed lightly and scented with spice, though not so heavily that it becomes medicine disguised as hospitality. Heating wine or ale with spices is a pleasant way to face winter evenings. Cinnamon, cloves, ginger, pepper, or other aromatics may be added according to means and taste. There are also beliefs about what certain drinks do to the body. Warm wine may be considered strengthening. Cold drink may be avoided in some circumstances by people who believe it disturbs digestion or bodily balance. Some swear that drinking heated ale before bed prevents winter chills from settling into the bones. Others swear that adding enough spice prevents almost anything. No one can quite agree whether this is medicine or simply a very persuasive excuse for another cup. You tear bread slowly. The hall is quieter than it was at dinner. Conversation no longer competes with the full noise of household business. Voices stay low. Servants move with less urgency. Firelight replaces daylight as the dominant colour in the room. A musician takes a place near the hearth. He is returned with a small stringed instrument. Another household player joins in with a pipe. They begin softly. The melody is simple and repeating, something familiar enough that nobody needs to give it full attention. The sound rests beneath the conversation like another layer of warmth. You listen while eating. At the lower table, 2 retainers speak about the gate watch. At another, a servant tells someone that frost is already forming on the water trough outside. A groom who has finished his duties sits with both hands wrapped around his cup, staring into it as though ale contains the secret to warm fingers. The little dog moves beneath the high table. It has had a successful day. You suspect it has consumed dried apple, fish, bread, and at least one mysterious object nobody witnessed. Now it waits beneath your chair with the calm patience of experience. A piece of bread falls. The dog does not even move quickly anymore. It simply accepts destiny. Beyond the walls, the main gate is being secured. You cannot see it from where you sit, but the sounds travel faintly through the manor. First comes the groan of heavy timber, then the dull impact of the gate closing. Then, some moments later, the long wooden bar being lowered into place. The sound is reassuring. Once the gate is barred, the manor turns inward. Late travellers may still call from outside if necessity demands it, but ordinary movement has ended. Roads belong increasingly to darkness, cold, and whoever has been foolish enough not to reach shelter earlier. Watchmen take their places above the gatehouse. A brazier burns near one sheltered section of wall. Torches are fixed where light is most useful. Men stamp their feet against the cold and pull cloaks around their shoulders. From time to time, one walks the wall walk, looking over the fields and toward the road. The watch is not merely for enemies. Fire is a constant fear. So are thieves, wandering animals, unexpected travellers, and accidents in the dark. A shout may carry across the yard if something seems wrong. Tonight nothing does. The world beyond the walls appears quiet. A servant enters from the outer ward carrying cold air with him. His cloak is dark with mist. He speaks briefly to the steward. The last cart has arrived. The stable doors are fastened. The north track remains passable. The watchfire has been lit. You hear the report without interrupting your meal. These small confirmations settle something inside you. The day has been full of doors opening. Storerooms, chapels, court chambers, the writing room, the outer gate. Now everything closes again. The household folds itself inward like fabric packed carefully into a chest. The musicians change to another tune. This one is slower. Your cousin asks quietly whether the rosemary belief mentioned earlier is common in this region, the claim that a flourishing bush means the woman rules the house. You glance toward the steward's assistant. He is speaking with the servant and has heard nothing. You answer that such beliefs are better left in gardens. The older knight smiles into his cup. That is enough discussion of household politics for one evening. The final food is cleared. A small dish of preserved fruit appears. Wrinkled apples, a spoonful of honeyed pears. Not disappointingly, the famous pear preserves from the neighbouring household whose culinary reputation has now occupied several hours of conversation. You begin to suspect those preserves may exist only in legend. Some swear that noble kitchens conceal their finest recipes from rival households. Even now, it is hard to tell whether this is true or merely the medieval explanation for why somebody else's preserves always sound better. The meal ends without ceremony. Hands are washed. Cups disappear. Servants carry dishes toward the kitchens where another phase of labour begins scraping, rinsing, stacking, covering leftovers, checking embers, and setting aside what must be prepared before dawn. You remain seated while the last music fades. Outside, the wind moves round the manor walls. Torchlight flickers beyond the narrow windows. The smell of damp wool has softened beneath smoke and warm spice. Far away, beyond the gate and dark fields, the monastery bell begins again. Compline, the final prayers of the day. The note moves through the night and reaches the hall as a low, distant vibration. Conversation quiets almost by instinct. You rise. Your guests begin to withdraw toward their chambers. Servants lift candles. The little dog emerges from beneath the table and stretches. Ahead lies your own private room, the oak door, the half-burned candle from morning, and the slow final rituals before sleep. You leave the hall while the watchfires continue burning beyond the walls and the last bell fades into winter darkness. The final note of Compline follows you into the passage and slowly disappears behind the stone walls. For most of the household, the day is closing. Servants carrying candles move in opposite directions, some toward the kitchens, others towards sleeping chambers, or the final tasks that must be completed before anyone can properly rest. One woman carries folded linen beneath her arm. A groom passes through a lower doorway on his way back from checking the horses one last time. Somewhere behind you, a wooden table is dragged across the great hall floor with a long, tired scrape. The manor does not fall asleep at once. It settles. You climb the worn steps toward your private chamber. The little dog climbs with you, considerably slower now than during its energetic pursuit of the spindle earlier. Whatever combination of bread, fish, apple, and unauthorized crumbs it has consumed appears finally to have defeated its ambitions. Your attendant opens the oak door. The chamber feels almost exactly as it did before dawn, yet the day has changed the way you see it. The painted chest stands against the same wall. The bed curtains hang in the same heavy folds. Rushes cover the same cold floor, and on the small table beside the bed sits the remains of the beeswax candle that began your morning. It is shorter now, much shorter. The wax has gathered in pale folds around its base, hardened like frozen drips. You notice it immediately. A whole day measured not by numbered hours but by bells, meals, shadows, duties, and disappearing wax. The hearth has been rebuilt. Fresh logs rest over glowing embers, and the room is warmer than it was when you first opened your eyes. A brass or iron warming pan may even have been passed beneath the blankets earlier, filled with hot coals and moved carefully across the bed to chase away some of the cold. Carefully is the important word. Putting hot embers into a metal pan and sliding them beneath cloth is one of those medieval comforts requiring a certain faith in the person holding the handle. Your attendants begin helping you undress. The brooch comes away first, then the girdle. Keys that have accompanied you through storehouses and accounts are removed and placed safely aside for mourning. One by one, the layers of public identity begin disappearing. The heavier overgown is lifted away. The veil is unpinned. Your hair is loosened from its careful arrangement and combed again, more gently now. There is relief in the simplicity of it. All day, clothing has announced rank, modesty, household affiliation, wealth, responsibility. Now wool and fur are folded into chests. Jewellery is returned to a locked coffer. Your hair falls free around your shoulders. A basin of water is brought. You wash your hands and face once more. The water is warmer than it was before sunrise, which feels like a personal kindness from the universe. A little scented water may be used again, perhaps rosemary or lavender. Teeth can be rubbed with linen, salt, herbs, or tooth powders depending on household practice. Contrary to what later imagination sometimes suggests, medieval people do not universally surrender their mouths without resistance. They pick teeth, rinse mouths, chew herbs for fresher breath, and complain about toothache with the same weary consistency as everyone who comes after them. One attendant examines the rushes near the hearth and removes a damp section. Another checks the shutters. The iron latch is fastened. The outer world disappears. Only the wind remains audible. It moves round the manor in long, low breaths, pressing briefly against the shutters and sliding over the roof. You hear the watchman call somewhere outside. The words are indistinct. Then silence returns. Before bed comes prayer. You kneel beside the bed, supported by a small cushion. Your hands fold. The chamber is quiet enough that the crackling fire seems suddenly loud. You speak familiar words softly, offering thanks for the day and asking protection through the darkness. Night carries particular anxieties in your world. Darkness is deeper here. There are no streets washed constantly in artificial light, no bright windows scattered through distant countryside. Once candles are extinguished and moonlight disappears behind cloud, darkness becomes almost physical. People therefore surround sleep with habits of protection, prayers, crosses, sacred images, relics, blessed objects. Some keep a small devotional token near the bed. Others place herbs beneath pillows. Some swear that a knife or a piece of iron placed nearby prevents troublesome spirits from approaching a sleeper. Others believe sleeping with the head pointed in certain directions invites either blessing or misfortune. No one can quite agree whether the direction truly matters, and considering how many beds are positioned according to whichever wall leaks least, practical architecture probably has the final vote. Your prayer ends. You rise. Most of the attendants withdraw. One remains only long enough to make sure the candle, hearth, shutters, and bedding are as they should be. Privacy finally returns. Not complete privacy. It never truly is. A servant may sleep in an adjoining space. Guards remain outside. Household women can be summoned if needed. But the chamber belongs more fully to you now than at any other hour. The dog jumps onto a cushion near the bed. It turns 3 times, then 4. Apparently the exact geometry of sleep requires serious consideration. At last it collapses with a sigh. You climb into bed. The sheets retain a little warmth from the warming pan. The wool blanket settles over you. Then another. Bed curtains are partly drawn, trapping warmth inside and reducing the chamber to a smaller, softer world. Beyond them the fire glows orange. The candle burns low. Your body begins to remember the day in fragments. Cold stone before dawn. The bell beyond the river mist. The chapel relic nobody entirely trusts. Bread and smoked fish. The heavy ring of keys. The widow waiting for firewood. The repeatedly broken cartwheel. Rosemary in the still room. Indigo thread passing through linen. The pig accused of moral corruption. The scribe's blackened fingers. The muddy garden path. The pilgrim badge glittering beside the solar fire. Small things. Ordinary things. And together, they form the private structure of a noblewoman's life more completely than any tournament or royal procession ever could. Your status has given you comfort. It has also given you obligations. People depend upon the decisions made behind these walls. A servant receives medicine because someone oversees the still room. A widow burns deadwood because someone grants permission. A storehouse lasts through winter because someone counts what remains. A disagreement stays small because someone listens before deciding. The songs rarely linger over such work. Tonight you have The half-burned candle gives a sudden flicker. Its flame narrows. For a moment, shadows climb the bed curtains. Then the wick steadies again. Some swear that a candle extinguishing unexpectedly beside a sleeper means a spirit has crossed the room. You listen. Nothing crosses. The dog does not even raise its head. You decide that any spirit brave enough to enter this chamber will first have to negotiate with a very sleepy animal. The fire collapses softly. A log shifts into embers. Far beyond the walls, the abbey bell sounds once more, so faintly now that you almost wonder whether you truly hear it. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the sound comes from across the fields or from memory after listening to bells since before dawn. Either way, you close your eyes. The manor grows softer around you. The last servants move quietly through distant passages, their footsteps fading one by one until even the stone seems to be resting. Below, the kitchens darken. Iron pots sit cooling beside ash-covered coals. Wooden spoons lie washed and stacked. The great hall stands empty beneath its soot-black rafters, with only the faint glow of the hearth remaining where voices and music filled the air a few hours before. Outside, the watchfire burns steadily beneath the wall. Beyond it lie the winter fields, pale beneath a thin wash of moonlight, and beyond those fields the river, the old hawthorn, the monastery, and the muddy roads disappearing quietly into forest and darkness. None of them ask anything more from you tonight. The accounts can remain closed. The keys can remain still. The wheelwright can mend the troublesome cart tomorrow. The monks can consider their drainage ditch when daylight returns. For now, the whole small medieval world loosens its grip. Your blankets are heavy and warm. The pillow yields beneath your head. Near the hearth, the dog breathes slowly in sleep. The candle finally sinks toward its end, its light turning smaller and gentler until the painted chest, the rush-covered floor, and the old oak door begin fading from sight. You do not need to follow the bells anymore. There is nowhere left to walk, no gate to cross, no petition waiting. Only the quiet room, the cooling fire, and the winter wind moving softly beyond walls that have stood through countless nights before this one. And as the last glow settles into the embers, the manor slips gently into darkness. You let the day go. You let the roads disappear. You let the bells become distant. And you rest,